I walked into my $15 million mansion and caught my housekeeper doing something with my autistic son that made me question everything I thought I knew about love, success, and what my child actually needed to heal. Marcus Chen's $3,000 Italian briefcase slips from his trembling fingers, crashing onto the marble foyer as he witnesses something that defies every medical report, every specialist consultation, and every assumption he's held about his son's condition. Through the archway of his mansion's living room, he sees 8-year-old David, his autistic son who hasn't made eye contact in 8 months, who screams when touched, who hasn't spoken since his mother's death, dancing peacefully in the arms of Maria, their 52-year-old Salvadoran housekeeper. This isn't just movement. This is pure magic unfolding on his Persian rug. David's small hands, usually clenched in anxious fists or flapping uncontrollably, are gently wrapped around Maria's weathered fingers. His eyes, those beautiful dark eyes that look through Marcus like he's invisible, are locked onto Maria's face with an intensity that makes Marcus's chest constrict with indescribable pain. Uno, dos, tres, Maria whispers softly in Spanish, her voice carrying a tenderness Marcus realizes he's never used with his own child. She guides David in gentle circles, and impossibly, miraculously, David follows her lead with trust Marcus has never seen him show anyone. The same boy who recoils from his father's touch is leaning into this woman's embrace. The child who hasn't uttered a word since the funeral is humming along with Maria's Spanish lullaby, creating harmonies that fill the sterile mansion with something it's lacked for months: joy. Marcus grips the doorframe until his knuckles turn white. 3 years of the world's most expensive autism specialists. Countless therapy sessions at $400 per hour. A house filled with sensory equipment, communication devices, and educational tools that cost more than most people's cars. All of it useless compared to what he's witnessing right now. Maria notices his presence, and their eyes meet across the room. There's no judgment in her gaze, only gentle understanding mixed with something that looks like pity. She's been watching his son flourish in these precious moments while Marcus has been absent, convinced that success measured in dollars could substitute for presence measured in heartbeats. Papa's home. David suddenly whispers, his head turning toward Marcus without breaking the gentle sway he maintains with Maria. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. David rarely speaks, and when he does, it's usually single words repeated from therapy sessions. But Papa, that's new. That's personal. That's love. Marcus feels tears burning his eyes as he realizes the devastating truth. While he's been building an empire and writing checks to fix his son, this humble woman has been quietly healing David's wounded heart with the one thing money can't buy: unconditional presence and patient love. The afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows illuminates not just their impromptu dance, but Marcus's complete failure as a father. He's provided everything except what mattered most: himself. As David giggles, a sound so pure it pierces every wall Marcus has built around his heart, he understands that he's witnessing both the most beautiful and most devastating moment of his life. In this single scene, watching his housekeeper accomplish what armies of professionals couldn't, Marcus faces a truth that will either destroy him or transform everything he believes about success, healing, and what it truly means to love a child who sees the world differently. The dance continues, and with each gentle step, Marcus realizes his son was never broken. He was just waiting for someone to meet him where he is, in the language he understands: pure, patient, unconditional love. The dance ends, and Marcus watches Maria gently guide David to his favorite corner where he begins arranging his toy cars in precise lines, a ritual that's become his only predictable comfort since his mother Sarah's death 6 months ago. The mansion falls back into its suffocating silence, broken only by the hollow echo of Marcus's footsteps on marble floors that cost more than most homes. This $15 million house feels like a beautiful tomb. Every room screams of absence: Sarah's empty chair at the dining table, her unused side of their king-sized bed, her piano gathering dust in the music room where she used to play lullabies for David. Marcus has kept everything exactly as she left it, as if preserving her spaces could somehow preserve her presence. David's bedroom tells the story of Marcus's desperate attempts to buy his way out of grief. Walls lined with expensive sensory equipment, a $5,000 weighted blanket, therapeutic swings, communication tablets, educational toys recommended by specialists. Everything gathering dust while David sits in the corner, methodically arranging and rearranging the same 12 Hot Wheels cars his mother gave him for his 7th birthday. Marcus picks up a framed photo from David's nightstand, the last family picture they took together. Sarah's arms wrapped around both her boys, David actually looking at the camera, all three of them laughing at something silly Sarah had just said. Marcus remembers that day perfectly. It was 2 weeks before Sarah's cancer diagnosis, 3 months before David stopped speaking, 6 months before Marcus became a single father to a child he couldn't reach. "The doctors say he'll come around," Marcus whispers to Sarah's image, his voice cracking in the empty room. "They say trauma affects autistic children differently, that he needs time to process the loss." But how much time? How many more months of David retreating deeper into silence while Marcus throws money at problems that can't be solved with his credit card? The house's intercom crackles, Maria's voice asking if David needs anything for dinner. Marcus realizes this woman, who he pays less in a month than he spends on a single therapy session, just accomplished something that has eluded him, his mother-in-law, and a team of specialists. She made his son smile. He walks to David's corner and sits on the floor, something he hasn't done since Sarah's funeral. David doesn't acknowledge him, continuing his precise car arrangements. Marcus reaches out tentatively, then pulls his hand back, remembering how David screamed the last time he tried to offer comfort. The boy who just danced with Maria still flinches at his father's approach. "I don't know how to help you, buddy," Marcus whispers, his voice barely audible. "Mommy always knew what you needed. I'm failing at everything that matters." Outside David's window, the sun sets over manicured gardens maintained by a staff of 6. The pool house contains more square footage than most families' entire homes. The garage holds cars worth more than small businesses. Yet sitting here on his son's bedroom floor, Marcus has never felt poorer in his life. The silence stretches between father and son, two broken hearts living under the same roof, both grieving the woman who was their translator, their bridge, their home. Marcus built this mansion to give his family everything, but now it feels like an expensive prison where love goes to die and children disappear into themselves while their fathers count money instead of moments. As David continues his endless ritual with the toy cars, Marcus makes a silent promise to Sarah's memory. Somehow, someway, he's going to learn the language his son speaks. Even if it means starting over. Even if it means admitting that all his success means nothing if he can't reach the one person who matters most. Maria Elena Gonzalez wasn't always cleaning other people's toilets for $15 an hour. Just 3 years ago, she was Professor Gonzalez, head of special education at Escuela San Miguel in San Salvador, where she spent 22 years unlocking the potential in children the world had written off as unreachable. Her classroom was legendary, the place where nonverbal children found their voices, where autistic students learned to navigate a world that seemed determined to misunderstand them. Parents would drive hours to enroll their children with the teacher who spoke the language of broken hearts and brilliant minds trapped in bodies that didn't cooperate. But revolution and violence have a way of reshaping dreams into survival. When gang members threatened her family, demanding her teacher's salary as protection money, Maria made the impossible choice that millions before her had made. She left everything behind for the promise of safety in America. The credentials that made her a respected educator in El Salvador meant nothing here. 22 years of experience, fluency in 3 languages, and a master's degree in special education became invisible the moment she crossed the border. America saw only an aging immigrant woman whose accent marked her as other, whose teaching certificate was just expensive paper in a language bureaucrats couldn't read. "You clean houses now, abuela," her 10-year-old grandson Miguel had said matter-of-factly when she arrived in Los Angeles, his own English already better than hers would ever be. Miguel, born with cerebral palsy, abandoned by parents who saw only disability where Maria saw infinite possibility, had become her whole world after his mother died in childbirth. Maria worked 3 cleaning jobs to afford Miguel's therapy sessions, his special equipment, his medications. She learned to swallow her pride when clients spoke to her like she was invisible, when they assumed her accent meant ignorance, when they treated her like a piece of furniture that happened to scrub their floors. But at night, in their cramped studio apartment, she remained Professor Gonzalez. She taught Miguel sign language when his speech became too difficult. She created communication boards from cardboard and magazine pictures when they couldn't afford the professional ones. She watched him flourish under her patient guidance, proof that love and understanding could overcome any obstacle. Then came the call that shattered her world again. Miguel, riding his wheelchair-accessible bus to school, was killed when a drunk driver ran a red light. 10 years old, brilliant, beautiful Miguel, gone in an instant, taking Maria's heart with him. The grief nearly destroyed her. For months she could barely function, cleaning houses like a ghost, mechanically moving through motions while her soul remained buried with her grandson. Other families' children became painful reminders of what she'd lost, their laughter like daggers to her wounded heart. But children have a way of calling to broken healers. The first time she saw David Chen, sitting alone in that corner arranging his cars, she saw Miguel. Not his disability, but his isolation. Not his diagnosis, but his desperate need for someone to understand that his silence spoke volumes, that his repetitive behaviors were attempts at control in a world that felt chaotic and unsafe. Maria recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't just autism, this was grief. The same grief she carried, the same lost look she saw in her own mirror every morning. David was drowning in sorrow, surrounded by people trying to fix him instead of simply seeing him. "Ay, mi niño," she whispered in Spanish the first day she saw him. "I know that pain. I know that loneliness." In David, Maria found purpose again. In his silence, she heard Miguel's voice calling her back to what she was born to do: not clean houses, but heal hearts. Not scrub floors, but build bridges between broken children and a world that moved too fast to notice their unique brilliance. She had lost her credentials, her country, her grandson, but she hadn't lost her gift. And David Chen, sitting in his corner with his toy cars, needed that gift more than any child she'd ever taught. The morning Marcus hired Maria, he stood in his marble foyer like a CEO conducting a board meeting, clipboard in hand, treating the interview like a business transaction rather than an invitation into his family's broken world. "Mrs. Gonzalez, let me be absolutely clear about the expectations," Marcus said, his voice crisp and professional as he handed her a typed contract. "You are here to maintain this household. Nothing more. I need someone reliable who can keep things clean and organized while I travel for business." Maria nodded, her weathered hands folding the contract carefully. She needed this job. The $15 an hour was more than her other clients paid, and the Chen mansion would provide steady work. Her small apartment's rent wouldn't pay itself, and Miguel's medical bills still haunted her mailbox months after his death. Marcus continued his rehearsed speech, walking through the mansion's main floor like a real estate agent. "The master suite is off limits. My office is never to be touched. I have important documents that cannot be disturbed. The pool house, wine cellar, and garage are also restricted areas." They paused outside David's playroom, where the boy sat in his usual corner, methodically lining up Hot Wheels cars in perfect rows. Maria's trained eye immediately catalogued everything: the unused therapy equipment, the untouched educational toys, the child's rigid posture that screamed of trauma and overwhelm. And most importantly, Marcus's voice dropped to a stern whisper: "Do not engage with my son. David has autism and requires specialized care from trained professionals. He has behavioral therapists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, people with degrees and certifications who understand his condition. Your job is to clean around him, not interact with him." Maria watched David through the doorway, her heart breaking at his isolation. The boy was arranging his cars in the exact same pattern she'd seen Miguel create during his most anxious periods, seeking control through repetition, finding safety in predictability. "He doesn't like to be touched or spoken to by strangers," Marcus continued, mistaking her observation for curiosity. It can trigger meltdowns that set back weeks of progress. The last housekeeper tried to help by moving his toys, and David didn't eat for 2 days. The contract felt heavy in Maria's hands as she read the specific instructions. Employee must maintain complete professional distance from the minor child. Any attempts to engage, interact with, or provide unsolicited care to the child will result in immediate termination. Do you understand these terms, Mrs. Gonzalez? Marcus asked, checking his expensive watch. I need someone who can follow instructions precisely. My son's routine cannot be disrupted. Maria looked again at David, seeing not a child who couldn't be reached, but a little boy drowning in grief while the adults around him spoke about him like he wasn't there. She saw the careful distance everyone maintained, the clinical approach that treated symptoms rather than the wounded heart beneath. Si, Senor Chen, I understand, she said softly, her accent thick with emotion. You want me to clean your house, not your son's heart. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her sharply, but Maria's face remained professionally neutral. She signed the contract with a steady hand, knowing that sometimes the most important rules were made to be broken by people who understood that healing couldn't be scheduled or systemized. As Marcus showed her the supply closet and explained the cleaning schedule, Maria made her own silent contract. She would clean his house impeccably, follow every rule about restricted areas, maintain the professional distance he demanded. But if David needed her, if this grieving child reached out in the small, subtle ways that traumatized children do, she would find a way to answer that call. You can start Monday, Marcus said, handing her a set of keys. I'll be traveling to Seattle for the rest of the week. The house manager will check on your work. As Maria walked to her rusty Honda Civic, she glanced back at David's window. The boy was still in his corner, still arranging cars, still desperately alone in a house full of people paid to help him but forbidden to love him. I see you, mi niño, she whispered in Spanish. And I will find a way. Maria's first week at the Chen mansion was a master class in invisible observation. She cleaned around David like he was a piece of expensive furniture, maintaining the professional distance Marcus demanded while her teacher's heart catalogued every detail of his world. David's routine was heartbreakingly precise. Every morning at 8:47 a.m., he would arrange 12 Hot Wheels cars in the exact same pattern on his bedroom carpet, a complex design that looked random to untrained eyes but followed a logic only David understood. The red Ferrari always went in the center, surrounded by specific colors in a sequence that never varied. On Thursday morning, Maria was dusting the hallway when she heard the sound every caregiver dreads, a sharp crash followed by complete silence. She found David frozen in his doorway, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his scattered cars. One had rolled under his bed, breaking the sacred pattern, disrupting the one thing in his world that made sense. The contract's words echoed in Maria's mind. Do not engage with the child. But 22 years of teaching had trained her to recognize a crisis when she saw one. David's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow, the beginning of a meltdown that could last hours. Maria knelt slowly, making no sudden movements. David's eyes tracked her, but he remained frozen, trapped between his need for the car and his inability to break his rigid routine to retrieve it. It's okay, mijo, she whispered in Spanish, knowing he wouldn't understand the words but hoping he'd hear the gentleness in her tone. She reached under the bed and carefully retrieved the wayward car, a blue Mustang that belonged in the third position of David's pattern. Instead of handing it to him, she placed it gently on the carpet exactly where it belonged in his arrangement. David's breathing slowed as he stared at the restored order, his meltdown prevented by this small act of understanding. For the first time since she'd arrived, David looked directly at Maria. Not through her, not past her, but at her. His dark eyes, so much like Miguel's, held a flicker of something she hadn't seen, recognition that she understood his world worked differently, that his need for order wasn't defiance but survival. Gracias, David whispered, the Spanish word falling from his lips like he'd been speaking it all his life. Maria's heart stopped. This child, who supposedly couldn't connect, who hadn't spoken to strangers in months, had just thanked her in her native language. Not because he knew Spanish, but because somehow, in that moment of crisis, he'd recognized that she was safe. She wanted to respond, to build on this miraculous connection, but footsteps in the hallway made her spring to her feet. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, appeared in the doorway with her clipboard and disapproving frown. "Is there a problem here?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her eyes taking in the scene with sharp suspicion. "No problem," Maria said quickly, grabbing her dust cloth. "Just cleaning." Mrs. Patterson's gaze lingered on David, who had already begun arranging his cars again, the moment of connection seemingly forgotten. But as Maria moved past him to continue cleaning, David did something extraordinary. He adjusted the blue Mustang's position by exactly 1 inch, creating a tiny space in his perfect pattern. It was the smallest gesture imaginable, invisible to anyone who didn't understand the language of traumatized children. But Maria understood. In his rigid world of unchangeable rules, David had made room for her, literally created a space in his pattern that acknowledged her presence, her help, her understanding. That afternoon, when she finished cleaning his room, Maria noticed David had left one car slightly out of alignment. As she moved to straighten it out of habit, she realized this wasn't an accident. He was testing her, seeing if she would understand that this small imperfection was intentional, a message only she could read. Maria smiled and left the car exactly as David had placed it. When she returned the next day, all 12 cars were in perfect formation except one, a different car in a different position, another microscopic rebellion that said, "I see you seeing me." For the first time since Miguel's death, Maria felt the familiar warmth of connection with a child who needed her to understand their unique language. David wasn't broken, he was brilliantly, beautifully different. And despite every rule Marcus had set, despite every contract clause forbidding interaction, Maria knew she'd just experienced the beginning of something that could change this child's life. The spark had been lit. Now she had to decide whether to nurture it or let it die in the name of professional distance.